How can an all-good, all-loving, omnipotent, and omniscient God allow suffering? Is he capable of stopping it and chooses not to? Or is he not all good or all loving? Today, we're going to talk about that. Hey, I'm Bailey.
I'm Michael.
And I'm David.
And welcome to a brand new series of episodes brought to you by the Facing the Gates podcast co, aka us three. Anyway, it's called Objections to Theism and Christianity. In this series of episodes, we're going to look at some of the major objections people have with Christianity and, by extension, belief in God in general. Now, obviously, there are many objections people have to religious belief, but in this series, I have consolidated it down to what I believe to be the most interesting questions that require decisive, thought-out responses. And the first objection we're looking at is called the problem of evil, as I described in the intro. This is one of the most notorious objections to theism that atheists use. And I guess starting out, I wanted to ask you guys, do you think this is a problem for the existence of God, at least for you? And if so, how big a role do you think it plays?
I mean, to start off, for me, no. Because I've always believed for every good deed, there's an evil deed. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. It's natural law.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was Christian, I was leaning more into the kind of hands-off theistic approach, where there is a God, but he doesn't necessarily meddle in our earthly doings.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do lean back into a titled religion, I would still very well much believe that, because, I mean, there has to be evil.
Yeah.
If there's good.
Right.
If not, we're in purgatory.
Right. Just as a side topic, which we can discuss at a later date, Christianity is kind of a panentheistic worldview, which is one. There's pantheism, which is the belief that all is God, the universe is God, it's the same thing. And then there's panentheism, which you got to be careful because it gets tied up with other stuff. But basically, it's like, I can show you like a diagram, but it's like, it's mainly like there's like a big bubble, and that's the universe, and there's like a tiny bubble that's kind of attached to it, and that's God. So like God established the universe, but there's a little bit of involvement in it that he has with it.
Yeah.
So for the most part, he's not,
Over every little fucking aspect.
Yeah.
Because then you wouldn't have free will.
Right. So what about you, David? Is this an issue for you?
Not really. I mean, I know it's a major issue for like a lot of atheists, like the very few I've been able to talk to that are open about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of their major issues. But to me, especially like the Christian mindset is you will have trials and tribulations set in front of you to face to build you up as a better person. And I mean, that kind of happens throughout life regardless of your worldview.
Right.
So it's not a deal breaker to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'd say...
But that's just kind of how being raised and going like the churches we did. And it's like, oh, well, God's not always going to have his hand in your favor. He's going to test your ass.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the issue is a lot of people are trying to sell people on Christianity. It's all rainbows and butterflies over here. Once you believe in God.
Or on the opposite side, sell you to
They're not telling you the whole
filthy
story.
atheist, where it's like, oh yeah, God doesn't exist, and if he did, he wouldn't love you. And it's like, no, I mean, there's such things as tough love.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a metaphorical for anybody out there. Let's say you have a kid or you have a dog, are you going to fucking get involved in every little bit of their business? No, you got bigger shit to handle. You don't think a higher power is going to have way bigger shit to handle than Karen calling you a bitch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Come on now.
Yeah. Well, atheist philosophers, Michael has solved your problem of evil. You might as well go home.
Not all of y'all. So.
I know.
But you edgy atheists.
I get what you're saying. I mean,
because one of the very few. Dude was a terrible human being. You know who I'm talking about, Michael. He would just yell about like God and basically the problem of evil. Mm-hmm. It's like you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Because it's like trials and tribulations, and if there's the big man up there, he has more important stuff to deal with.
Yeah, and not to carry this on too much longer, but look at the story of Job, I want to say.
Yeah.
That motherfucker went through trials like a motherfucker.
I'm actually going to be bringing him up later.
Well, then I won't dig too far in, but right there, if you want to talk shit on something, read the fucking book.
I mean, and like the experience of Jesus was a big ass trial.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep.
So in the kind of how I view Christianity, it's all about trials and tribulations and building yourself up to be a better person.
Yeah. So throughout this episode, I'm going to offer various popular theodicies, which are reasons why God may permit evil. And though this is not an exhaustive list, much like the arguments for God's existence, there are many more theodicies out there. The ones I will be discussing in this episode are some of the ones that I find most interesting and that I personally believe are sufficient explanations for why evil exists in the world today. And also, like I mentioned, because a lot of people raise this as an issue, this is one of the ones that I am going to take more seriously because a lot of people raise it. It may not, obviously, it's not you guys, but even for me at times, it's kind of been a struggle. Because there is an emotional aspect to the issue, and there's also a philosophical aspect of it, because it's like when you go through something really difficult, a lot of people are pointing to coronavirus as like, oh, well, God doesn't exist because he allowed coronavirus. That's an emotional reaction to something.
Or like when someone you're close to has something happen or passes, like, it will shake your worldview.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with that emotional response and asking, like, why did this happen?
Yeah, and to add a little insight into why me and David think a certain way is we are so fucking jaded from life.
Yeah.
That, like, we're just going to look at it from a realistic point of view.
Yeah.
And not everyone has that issue growing up of going through the struggles we went or struggles you went and having to grow and learn past it.
And it's like you say with free will, if we don't have free will, then God can just do whatever he wants. We're little puppets in his little toy set. But if we have free will, he's going to let people be terrible people and judge them upon that, and judge those that have to respond and react to that accordingly.
Yeah, and there is, like I was mentioning, there's also the philosophical side to it where people are like, okay, God's all-knowing, he's all-powerful, he's all good. Why doesn't he stop evil? If he's capable of doing it, why doesn't he do it? So that's the philosophical aspect of it, and that I think is a little bit more interesting and substantial.
Yeah.
And obviously, most of the things that I'm going to be bringing up are arguments against the philosophical problem of evil. The emotional problem of evil, while I think it's valid, I don't think it is necessarily something to pit up against
it's a
arguments for God's existence.
It's like fire and brimstone preaching. That's an emotional response.
It's a human response. It's like that quick instinct, not something you can think about. It happens.
And I have my viewpoints on the philosophical side, but I'll let that come when it needs to.
Okay. So one answer would be Christianity and Judaism are unique in the sense that they have an explanation for the human condition that no other religion has, which is original sin. When Adam and Eve betrayed God in the Garden of Eden, that resulted in a fall that allowed evil to infect the world and humanity. If this is true, it would be an explanation as to why evil exists in the world today. However, when I've heard this in the past, it always has seemed kind of like a pat answer, which is just like, oh yeah, this is why it happens. And then that's the end of the conversation. So I will be giving other solutions to this problem, but that is at least one response that you would hear. It's a good response. It's a good starting place. It's just, I feel like a lot of times people are like really dismissive of the problem and don't really spend the time that it takes to adequately
it's a good
handle
starting
it.
place,
And like
but
what,
it needs to finish.
Right.
Adam and Eve, as like we talked about, like in the beginning with the Bible, it's very artfully written, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And in my eyes, like the idea of original sin is, regardless of like
Whether it was a literal or metaphorical
how
event, it's
sheltered
just an
one can
explanation.
be, you're going to mess up eventually. And something's going to tempt you.
Yeah. So regarding original sin, since I've brought that up, there's kind of a divergence between Eastern and Western thought, being Western Christianity being Catholicism and Protestantism, and then the Eastern Orthodox Church. I do kind of prefer the Orthodox perspective because the Western view is more because Adam and Eve sinned, we have inherited that sin, and by default we are sinful. Whereas the Orthodox view is because Adam and Eve sinned, it made the rest of humanity capable and more inclined to sin, not that just we inherit sin or are born into it. We are born with an inclination towards sin because our ancestors made that possible, and we are born into a fallen world because humanity and the earth both have fallen away, not just humanity. That to me makes a little bit more sense, and it's a little less doom and gloom.
And
So basically, for an atheist term, because sin was advantageous, even for a little bit, humanity evolved to be capable of
at this point,
I'm just being a shitlord at that point.
and
I get the idea, and I would fit better with the Orthodox idea than just like, oh yeah, it's inherited. It's like,
because I think
but why?
It shows that even the earliest were human.
Mm-hmm.
And so with them being human and having human offspring, we're all capable of good and bad.
Right.
Because we're not gods.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing all three of us can agree on. We'd probably, if me and David were Christian, we'd lean more on that side of the table.
Yeah, that's one thing that kind of has drawn me towards there, because their theology in most areas makes more sense. Now, granted, it's, as I'm looking more into that, there's a lot to it. It's very, very different from what I've grown up in, but that's a process. But that's a different conversation for a different day. So, the problem of evil, as I mentioned, plays an emotional role for people on the fence. Think of tragedies such as 9/11 or the Holocaust. But it also has deep philosophical undertones. If God can stop evil, why doesn't he? So one response I might give to this is the idea of evil is kind of a philosophically loaded term, and we need to define that adequately. Evil is relative, and it cannot exist unless it is a distinction from good. A philosopher by the name of Platonius, around the 3rd or 4th century, argued for the privation theory of evil, which is the idea that evil is simply the lack of good. Christianity backs up this idea with the doctrine of hell, a realm that is separation from God and therefore a privation of anything good. Though we will talk more about hell in a future episode. Dun, dun, dun. And in this world where God has left people to their own devices after our ancestors turned against him in the garden, this is simply expected and accounted for in Christianity. Other worldviews don't account for why humanity has a natural propensity to commit evil acts. Now, for some other theodicies, I think probably the most popular one is that God respects man's free will to choose whether or not to act morally. This plays a direct role in the problem of evil because much of the evil that we experience in this world is not because of God, but because of the choices of other human beings. In other words, evil is a human problem, not a God problem.
Yeah, I mean, looking back when I was Christian, I was leaning towards certain old, I hate to say it like this, but early America's viewpoints. I was very much in a hands-off approach of Christianity. And so that I can say, yeah, kind of agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, I can agree with the idea of evil being a human problem, because I mean, we're the ones that invented it. You look at like animals doing atrocious things to each other, and it's like, oh, that's just nature.
Yeah, and it's like a kid. If you control something, is it really living at that point? If you're just like making it do certain things because this is right, this is wrong.
Exactly, and that's the thing. I think that's especially focused upon in the Christian worldview, is that you have free will. God is not controlling you with his mind or anything.
He may influence you and like maybe try to push you to like do a little bit better, but he's not going to be like just grabbing you and yeeting
he might
you to the right
like
way.
nudge you in the right way, but he's not going to mind control you and to act morally, because he values freedom.
Yeah, and this is like the proving ground.
Right. Yeah. So, in the philosophical sense regarding this problem, just because you can't conceive of a reason why God wouldn't allow suffering or would allow suffering doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have one. If you limit God to your own understanding, you have a small God that is barred by the limits of your own intellect. God is much larger than you and I. Think of the worst thing that has ever happened to you. You don't have to say what it is, just imagine it. Now, did anything good come of it? Did you learn anything or grow? My point is that perhaps God permits suffering to encourage greater goods in the end. I can think of countless times that I felt like I was going through something bad, only to realize that it was for the better in the end.
Can I add a small interjection here?
Sure.
All of you Darwinists out there should really agree with that. Because if you truly believe survival of the fittest, if you do some dumb shit and get killed, it's the end of your bloodline. If you do some dumb shit, that will cause either you or someone else to learn from that. Which is essentially the role God's playing here. It's letting you make these dumbass choices.
And also, and
letting you get your ass killed.
And not ruling with an iron fist. And
also with him being all-knowing, I mean, especially since, like, we've established the idea of God will be beyond space and time, so he knows everything. I mean, he already knows what's going to how your life's going to go, so why you got to worry about it?
He knows when you're going to fart.
He just got to let things
that's
go.
Disturbing.
Just got to let things go.
I have to meditate on that one. Sorry.
Yeah, meditation is great.
Yeah, it is. Not gonna lie, it's hard sometimes because my brain is insane.
It
doesn't shut up.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point of meditation.
I know. That's the point.
Shut the brain and focus.
Yeah. So, bundled in with the problem of evil is the assumption that we are inherently good people and we deserve a good life. But under the Christian view, this is absolutely not true. Just look at the book of Psalms, Lamentations, or Job. These people are crying out to God saying, "Why did you let this happen?" This is the Bible. This is in the Bible for a reason. Christianity doesn't promise sunshine and rainbows. It is very raw and honest with the way the world is. Also, the problem of evil may be subverted by thinking about it differently. Instead of asking, why has God allowed this, we may want to ask, how will God work through this? And believe it or not, there's actually a story in the Bible that can relate to this very problem. In the book of Job, Job loses everything. His livelihood, his family, everything. When Job contests with God and demands a reason why he allowed him to go through everything he did, God's response at the end is this, quote, "Who darkens my counsel with words without wisdom? Where were you when I laid out the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? Can you send forth lightning? Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. End quote. These are quotations from Job 38 to 40. Throughout these 3 chapters, God basically roasts Job by saying, "You don't know the first thing about being God. Who are you to question my methods?" The moral of the story here is that Job doesn't see the bigger picture that God sees, and neither do we.
And no one can really blame Job for that.
Oh, no, definitely.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
he went through a lot.
Yeah,
And
so
his fate stayed throughout that, and he used his free will to ask God, hey, yo, what the fuck?
And
And
the
God was
awesome,
like, listen here, bitch. Trust me.
the awesome thing about that book is it shows his whole struggle. Like, you can see, like, how he is at the beginning when his life's all pristine, and then how his faith slowly deteriorates, and
as
then
he
how he gets...
slowly gets in a shittier and shittier situation.
He slowly gets angrier and slowly gets more resentful, and then finally he does this at the end of the book and is like, yo, God, what's the deal, man? And then finally, when he gets a response, this is what he hears.
It was a very alpha move by God. Like, oh, you think people don't believe in me, bitch?
Yeah.
Look at this motherfucker. I'm gonna fuck this shit up. But there's gonna be a reason for it. You might not know it, but to prove y'all bitches wrong, I need my $20.
Okay. Michael's summation of the Book of Job, out on Amazon right now.
$20 is
Amen.
$20.
But yeah, so the problem of evil has different effects depending on the person. Some are repulsed by God and thinks his existence is an impossibility because of evil, while others realize how finite and contingent they are and therefore turn to God for comfort. I just think it's kind of interesting how this is a problem for some people and it causes people to turn away, whereas other people, when experiencing the exact same thing, actually turn to God.
Well, I mean, it depends on, like...
Your disposition.
Yeah, because some people, like, if you just have nothing but shitty things happen throughout your life, yeah, you're going to be spiteful.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna flip the script. I think if your life has been all good and dandy, and you are a good Christian boy or girl,
Oh, so
and then your life goes to shit, or you lose someone, or you go through a real fucking struggle, those people will flip because they might not have believed before.
Yep.
But some of the people who've been through the worst shit I know, some of the strongest individuals I know, and I'm thinking of one lady right now.
Mm-hmm.
She knows everything has a greater purpose, and she keeps pushing forward.
Yeah, it also just depends on, like, how strong the person's faith is to start with, honestly.
Yeah.
Because, like, it takes just... It's like with anything. You can have that one emotional, like, setback, and it's over. Or you can take your time, think about what's ever happening, and assess the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think 12-step programs use religion so strongly? It's because someone who's really at the bottom with nothing else to lose, nothing else to look for, they're going to reach for something bigger than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Something
Whether
that
drugs,
has a longer
religion,
angle.
politics, and they're going to work their way out of it.
That's
Whereas-
also just a very human thing, is
Yeah.
we want to, and we'll probably talk about this in a later episode, but we want to transcendentalize something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We
whereas,
want to have something higher
some
to look
sort
to.
of community.
Yeah,
even if it's just like you and your higher power.
Even if it's not, this might be a rabbit hole that we should probably talk in another episode about, but even if you don't believe in God, there will be something that you put in place of God in some form or fashion.
money, drugs, women, politics, fashion.
Stuff, attention.
Yeah.
I mean, heck, like, my idea of, like, leaving this earth and hopefully a better spot than I came to. That can be seen kind of as trying to have that
Impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't achieve
something
that, you're
greater.
going to be in despair.
I mean, I'm going to try my best, so I ain't going to worry too much about it, but I'm going to try.
Yeah. So many people who appeal to the problem of evil are oftentimes in fortunate, well-off first world countries where their day-to-day needs are met and death is not an immediate issue. The problem of evil isn't nearly as big of an issue for people who experience hardship on a daily basis, such as in third world countries or in ancient times, because they are eager and appreciative for any inkling of existential hope. That's kind of what Michael was saying earlier. This is why Jesus said that it would be easier for the rich man to go through the eye of a needle than to enter the kingdom of heaven, because he is blinded by his materialism and doesn't see a need for existential hope. This is not to write the issue off, but we do need to be aware of how modern and westernized this problem really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
because the millionaire losing $800,000, he's still fine with $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
But he's gonna like, oh, fuck you, God, you're not real. Whereas someone with $10 loses $8. Oh fuck, we're gonna keep grinding again. We're gonna get $10 again.
And the case of the rich man there, which this is actually what, going back to Job, in the beginning of Job, it's kind of like in the council of heaven or whatever, and Satan's telling God, look at Job. Have you not put a hedge around him? Have you not given him everything? Obviously, he's only worshiping you because you've given him stuff. So only go take that stuff from him, and then we'll see if he really worships you.
Job was real.
And God was like, all right, you can do it, but don't lay a finger on him. You can do whatever to his people and his family and his livelihood, but don't touch him. And so kind of similarly with the rich man situation you kind of gave, and that in that scenario, if someone is, you know, a millionaire and a Christian, for example, and then they get mad at God and then they don't believe in God anymore after they lose their money, God wasn't their real God. Money was their real God.
Yeah. It's, again, like the once saved, always saved fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also play kind of the, I don't know exactly, but when you're living like day to day trying just to survive, you don't really have time to think about these existential questions.
Yeah, a lot of people get busy and just don't think about it.
Yeah.
Or you're just thankful for every little bit you get.
Yeah, you're just, regardless of like your actual beliefs, you're just appreciative because
I mean,
you're surviving. They think of like a lot of philosophers, wealthy, or like at least usually comfortable.
I mean, I've been at the bottom. I've walked in a parking lot, picked up $5, and that was the biggest blessing I could get. Whereas most people walk in a parking lot, pick up $5, it's $5.
Right.
Who fucking cares?
Yeah, and also like the kind of idea of humility allows oneself to be in that vulnerable position to be accepting.
Yeah. And one other point on the whole, like, I guess idolatry and who your true God is really, is it takes a lot of introspection, because we can be very deceptive to ourselves about who we worship and what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I mean, I work on that. I'm not the best at it, but I know a lot of people are worse. And like,
or they just don't think about that.
Yeah, or they just don't, because like I have to decompress like at the end of every day and like think about the day and kind of process things.
Just
and if
sit
I don't
in your chair and just relax.
If I don't think about things, if I choose to ignore how things are going, then I'm just going to fall back in life and not really pay attention to anything. And that's how you get caught up in the waves of everyday life and ignoring.
And the grind.
Getting caught up in the grind and ignoring yourself, really.
And what matters.
Yeah.
And I think that's a large problem with modern culture. So we don't allow ourselves that time.
Right.
Because, you know, we work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're busy spending our 2 days off thinking about how much we don't want to spend the next 5 days.
Plus, if you have kids or other occupational duties, you're busy for most of the day. You don't have that
and instead of
time to contemplate.
Instead of being thankful you have a job, instead of being thankful you got a place to rest your head, having food in your stomach, We're just sitting here like, fuck, I really don't want to go to work tomorrow.
You get worn down by it all.
Yeah. Reminds me of an Architect song called Even If You Win, You're Still a Rat. And the video is basically just a time lapse of everyone in their modern day life over and over and over and over again, just living in the machine.
In the rat race.
Working. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say I think our generation is one that's finally really introspecting into that. We know how fucked it is.
I mean,
But there's not much we can do about it.
I mean, a lot of us have to work like 2 jobs just to survive.
Wow, we have gotten existential.
Yeah.
Back to the problem of evil.
But isn't religion existential?
Yeah, well, that's the whole point, right?
Dun,
the
dun,
whole point of
dun.
the show is to be existential. So
Yeah. And I mean, religion ties heavy with cultural, economic, all types of issues.
yeah, it touches on a lot of things. So another point is this: the problem of evil assumes naturalism, and is really only a problem for people who believe in naturalism. If you are a Christian, you believe that there will be justice in the end. Just because God isn't sitting there on his throne smiting those who do wrong doesn't mean that people won't have to be held accountable for their actions in the future. And also, suffering has the power to either refine us and make us stronger people, or turn us bitter and cynical. Just think of how the past events have shaped who you are today. How we choose to react to suffering and whether or not it enables us to grow is ultimately up to you. And to make another metalcore song reference, in the words of August Burns Red, there's beauty in tragedy.
Yeah. And one thing I've never understood, especially with Western Christianity, is when the word karma is brought up. Everyone thinks it's gonna be like this earthly reckoning of like, oh, you fucked me over, so you're gonna get fucked over.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily.
It's interesting that people draw that.
Because even in Christianity, it's not necessarily called karma, but there's karma. There's payment to be given for
There's
every good and bad
a
deed.
final judgment day.
Yeah.
It's unclear what exactly, at least to me, it's unclear what. I mean, obviously you will be judged for your deeds, but if people are either going to heaven or hell, that kind of situation, I don't really see
because
what kind of degrees of punishment there will be. I don't know. I need to probably look more into that. But
looking at it through a
punishment or reward
through a non-Christian eye is like karma's in every religion.
Mm-hmm.
You might not want to just because it has a certain name given by a certain ideology doesn't mean that it's not also in yours. There's payment to be given.
Right.
You fuck someone over, you're going to pay for it. And so I think that's something a lot of Christians and Jewish and Islamic people need to be aware of, is just because it's not called that doesn't mean it's not coming for you.
Yeah.
It's the natural cycle. For all good there is evil, for all evil there is good. And in all evil there is good, and all good there is evil.
Mm-hmm. And last thing for this last section, the existence of evil may be a wake-up call for people who think they are in control of everything in their lives. When something or someone dear to you is taken away, it is a rude awakening to the fact that you yourself are limited. You are not God, and you need to rely on God. Moment of silence.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
We've all had the moments where we were shut.
And as we say before, it could also fall in the opposite direction. Not because having the kind of falling out from being in some semblance of control.
Yeah, there's two reactions to it. It's either you can get angry at God and turn away, or if you don't believe in God and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm about to die. Maybe I need to believe in this whole God thing. Maybe I need to think about the whole God thing again.
Well, that's pulling the cheat code. I don't think that works.
Well, I mean, if you have like a near-death experience or something, or like, you're in the hospital and you are like, wow, I could have died. See, some kind of life-changing experience might cause you to rethink things.
As I've always said, we don't know when that cutoff is.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to judge
We're all
him.
walking time bombs.
I'm not going to judge
Yeah.
a man who dies and goes up to God and is genuine with his response. Just like I'm not going to judge a man who accepts God on this earth because I don't know. I'm not the judge. I'm not sure.
Yep. I wouldn't hope to do that either.
Yeah.
I'm never going to say whether or not someone is
Yeah,
or isn't
because
in a good place.
who am I to judge you if you're on your deathbed and you pick the religion that has always seated with you and you're finally honest about it? Just like I'm not going to judge the kid who admits that or who finally comes out as gay or transsexual or whatever, because it doesn't matter to me. I'm not the judge. I'm not the juror. You be the best you can be while you're here and then while you're gone.
Basically, don't be a dick.
Don't lay judgment upon people.
We all come back to the don't
Because
be a dick
we are
policy.
not the judges.
I mean, it's a great policy to have.
Yeah. All right, so distinctions of suffering. We need to make some distinctions of suffering. Suffer. Sorry. Anyway, there's natural evil, which would be like natural disasters, and moral evil, which would be killing someone. Why do natural disasters happen? This one's a little bit more complicated, but for the best response I have is because the earth too is fallen alongside humanity. Beyond that, I don't really think we can impose any other philosophical or moral logic as to why natural disasters occur, because that would be entering a realm of knowledge only held by God himself.
Yeah, that'll be coming to like creation of Earth and why it is how
I
it
got
is.
one thing to say. Humans like to go where the fuck we're not supposed to. If a city is under sea level, that fucker's going to flood.
I mean,
If you're on the coast, some waves going to come up.
you in California, you're gonna have some fires. I mean, all of
Earthquake.
America is basically
Dude.
like a
Natural
no-go.
disaster zone.
Yeah. Tornadoes, blizzards, hurricanes.
Oh, I live close to a
Fires.
volcano and it blows up. No shit. I live close to the coast and I got a hurricane. No shit. I live in a deep, flat area where it's windy all the time and there's a tornado.
hot.
No shit.
Yeah.
There's just some places we shouldn't fucking go.
Yeah.
And a lot
And
of
we
it's the
keep
US.
saying, oh, fuck you, we're going to go there. That's my human response.
Okay.
It's like New Orleans saying, oh, we got flooding problems. You're 4 to 8 feet under the fucking sea level. What do you
Yeah.
expect?
No, I mean, on the opposite end, like in Taiwan, there's a few areas that get like constant rain and have to deal with that heavy rain, but on the benefit, they're never in a drought. So it could be short-sightedness that started it.
I mean, the ocean's never in a drought. Doesn't mean I should go live on the fucking ocean.
Well, yeah, but also the settlements before, like
It's where you send poor
scientific
people.
issues such as global warming and stuff taking over.
Yeah, you send poor people there. That's what they did.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we went to California for gold and grapes.
And gravy.
And marijuana.
All right, well, back on topic. So I mentioned the distinctions of natural disasters, of natural evil and moral evil, but regarding the moral evil, that kind of just boils down to, and we've talked about this before, that kind of boils down to being fallen creatures with an inclination towards sin and possessing the free will to carry out those desires. Because we have free will, God must permit evil because with free will, we have the ability to choose whether or not to obey God. If he prevented people from committing an evil act, we would no longer have free will. We would be robots. And then the last theodicy I'm going to offer in this area, it's kind of one that's a little difficult to wrap your head around, but it's called the best possible world theory. So surely we conceive of a world that is worse than this one. So perhaps this is the best possible world that God could create while still accounting for human free will. that's that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Not
Or we're
really
gonna-
on that one.
It just reminds me of what a few people say. It's like for people going to hell, it's the closest they'll ever get to heaven, and for people going to heaven, it's the closest they'll ever get to hell. For some reason, that as soon as you said that, I forget. Like quite a few people have said that.
Pretty certain that's a Five Finger Death Punch song.
Yeah, the people that said it were not in the Five Finger Death Punch. I can guarantee you.
That's three
All
bands
people.
we've referenced already. That's one episode.
We only need Silent Planet now.
Yep. Slant Plant. All right.
Love you guys.
So the last section that I want to talk about, I'm going to make a case here. The fact that evil exists actually implies the existence of God. For an atheist appealing to the problem of evil, an equal problem exists, the problem of good. If God doesn't exist, how do we explain anything which we perceive as good? Where does that come from? C.S. Lewis was once an atheist because of the problem of evil, but then he realized an issue. Quote, "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I gotten this idea of just and unjust? What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it just didn't happen to meet my private fancies. Consequently, atheism turns out to be too simple." End quote. So as you see, the problem of evil, if you think it all the way through, leads to the belief in God because it assumes that there are moral absolutes. As I mentioned in the episode Morality, Objective or Subjective, I argued that that objective morality can be best explained in the existence of an objective moral source, such as God, because alternative explanations rely on subjective and arbitrary means such as evolution. And also recall in the episode how we all agreed in Love and Beauty, Do They Point to God, that you can't make something inherently subjective, such as our perception of beauty, into something objective. Think of the most attractive man or woman of the year example. You can't make a person objectively beautiful. That's still subjective. So therefore, there must be an objective rationale for morality and the problem, quote, problem of evil to even exist. That was a lot of words and a lot of brain. I'll let that sink in your brains.
Yeah.
I'm sure David will have some fiery words.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of it boils down to your worldview.
Yeah. One thing I was going to bring up is like, in my eyes, like, because like, I hate to use the human construct thing, but the only people that perceive evil are humans. So, because I mean, as I said, like, you can go in nature and see some atrocities being committed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whole like groups of animals just massacring each other. But that's unfortunately just nature. And as we spoke with like morality, not killing each other turns out to be very beneficial to us.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, due to certain things such as like between like competition, culture,
Emotions.
especially emotions, like evil happens, or short-sightedness leads to our ideas of evil, like someone stealing money instead of like going in and it's like, hey, kind of like mow your lawn for $5 or do something positive
Yeah.
out of that.
And I wouldn't say all of those that you mentioned are necessarily evil, but I get what you're coming from.
Yeah,
Because not
and like our society's eyes, like all of those are some form of even if it's a little evil, it could be understandable.
I mean,
and it depends on
killing a kitty diddler's not fucking evil.
Well,
Just taking out the trash.
Well, and like our lens, yes, but in say like Europe, they're like, let's get them like proper mental treatment and proper medication, stuff like that. It varies culture to culture.
True, very true.
Basically, what I'm getting at is there are two different atheist responses. There's the atheist that's going to appeal to the problem of evil, which really kind of defeats his own position because it admits that there is an objective morality. And if you admit there's objective morality, which you need for there to be evil, you have to admit that there's an objective moral source. And there's the other kind of atheist that doesn't appeal to the problem of evil because they don't believe in objective morality, and therefore morality just becomes subjective and fluid and entirely dependent on how you define it. And as we mentioned in that episode, there's a lot of problems with subjective morality, such as, is rape actually wrong, or is it just wrong because you think it's wrong? Because if you think it's wrong and I don't think it's wrong, well, I guess I'm okay.
Whereas I think all of us can say it's
Which I'm not going to do it, by the way. That was an example.
Yeah.
And
I just go ahead and preface that.
Yeah, I think at least in that idea, it's not necessarily like the personal beliefs are wrong, but just the cultural beliefs are wrong. Because be a part of a society. And now people have to agree like, oh yeah, we all agree upon this thing, so here's how we're going to do it.
Well,
and
that's cultural relativism.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned in the morality episode, which we're going to keep probably pinning back to that at points.
Oh, definitely.
Basically,
we pointed back to like quite a few episodes on this one.
Yeah. they kind of overlap. But basically, like, the problem with cultural relativism is the exact same problem with any form of relativism. Because if you believe that something is truly wrong, again, like in one culture, it could totally be okay to cut girls' toes off when they're born.
Or bind them.
Yeah, and that's that. You can't say anything about that being wrong because that's their culture, and you have no right if it's completely relative to culture. And then again comes the issue of if you have someone, I don't know, from Japan move to America, which culture are they a part of? Are they a part of the Japanese culture? Are they a part of American culture? And so then it gets complicated. Yeah. And
I think that's a major thing with like the overall globalization is we are, especially as it becomes more and more common, experiencing like the culture conflicts. And also each culture wants to push their own ideas to each other. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, thinking like, oh, what, like chopping off a certain limb or binding toes or stuff like,
or circumcision.
I mean, that too, medically, it's like, oh, those are bad things, but the cultural significance, unfortunately, for some cultures outweighs the practical medical.
Well, shit, if we're just going to start accepting all cultures worldwide, let's start killing the firstborns again. Let's bring that back.
I mean,
we already have.
Medically, I don't think that's sound.
I mean,
but that it's basically a giant like compare and contrast, because not every culture has a little bit of good or okay you can take from it, and that's kind of the beauty of globalization. And also, its weakest thing is people take certain things from.
Yeah, because you can marry a 12-year-old in some countries. Do that around here, you're a fucking pedophile.
Yeah.
Or if you hold certain beliefs in a certain country, you'll get killed.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely on like a hit list for several countries.
Whereas in other countries, you'll only be ostracized and publicly outcasted.
Yeah, you filthy fucking
atheist. And can't get a decent job.
Yeah. All right, so let's bring it back to the
worse fate.
Yeah. Let's bring it back to the topic at hand as we wrap up. what are your guys' thoughts on the problem of evil? As I've tried giving decent answers. Hopefully they're
not really
but like you said, it's not a problem.
It's not really a problem because if you believe in the natural order of things, nothing can be created. Everything has an equal and opposite reaction. That's science. So every positive reaction, there's also a negative reaction. For every negative, there's also a positive. 2 positives don't make negative. 2 negative don't make positive. This isn't math, okay? So, to believe in a scientific worldview and in the natural order of things, there is no problem of evil. If you are one of them atheists who go, oh, science. If you don't listen to the last 2 sentences I said, you don't believe in science. You just want to act like you do. Because there is no good without evil, no evil without good, no hot without cold, no north without south.
That's interesting. You're using science to take a philosophical position on, because that's the what is it, Newton's law? Second Newton's law? Do I actually know? Oh shit, I know something.
Got Newton this time. Last time it was Francis Bacon.
I wanted to say Sir Isaac Newton.
So,
but
anyway.
I was a little nervous about it. But yeah,
the basic laws of matter.
But yeah, you're basically using a scientific principle and applying it to
philosophical ideology.
Which makes sense, because I mean, like, in some cases it's like, okay, you can't just hijack science and then use it, but in this case it makes sense.
No,
because I think it is an
if you're going to use science
example.
to prove your viewpoint, you have to use all of science. If you're going to use religion to prove your viewpoint, you also have to take in consideration the obvious earthly rules that are here.
Right.
You got to make yourself sound and bulletproof.
Yeah.
So if you're an atheist and you believe in science and you believe in the problem of evil and you see that as a major issue, then the world itself is flawed. Which science doesn't really believe that, because everything has an answer.
Yeah, and also with like the idea of what something good happening versus something bad happening, it could vary, because I mean, yes, that creature might have died, but a tree grows in its place, or
plants die and we eat them and we get
or like
energy
the
from
natural culling of animals. When they get overpopulated, to keep that animal alive, things get cut back. It's not pretty, but it's the facts of nature.
Yeah, for me to live, something has to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all.
I think we all are pretty sound in agreeing with problem of evil isn't really.
If you believe in good, you have to believe in evil.
I just think it needs to be. I feel like a lot of people just brush it off, and it's like, it's a little more interesting. So I did spend a good bit of time
it's
in the past trying to like kind of work through this.
And you know what? I wish those people who are atheists who use that as their only punchline, just like, hey, I just don't believe. I can respect that, because I can not necessarily do anything about that. But you can say, oh, well, if God's such a good dude, why is this? We're on Earth, motherfucker.
Yeah, I mean, that
there's a difference between good objections and bad objections.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I tried to be fair. We're starting with the best objections, in my opinion. So the objections only get worse from here. So,
but I mean, I hate to say it, in good and bad, there's some times where you're like, okay, maybe that was good, maybe that was bad, but there's a lot of things where you can point to anybody of sound mind and body, and they'd be like, yeah, that's fucking awful.
Yeah.
It's fucking terrible.
Yeah. And for every situation like that, there's, as you said, that gray area where it's like, could be a little bit of both.
Yeah. But
all right, so I'm gonna wrap up with my last little spiel.
As I said, it's like a lot of, like, the few atheists I've actually talked to or pull that out, and it's like, the Bible's really about like testing people.
Yeah.
So
It's full of people who are struggling.
Yeah.
So many
experience.
religions are trial and
I mean,
tribulation.
the Old Testament was a little more aggressive in its testings.
Which we're going to have an episode on that
I don't know.
very soon.
Hanging a motherfucker to a cross and killing his ass is probably the biggest. Killing the physical embodiment of God is pretty hard fucking core, if you ask me.
I mean, drowning out most of life as they know it was pretty hardcore too.
Yeah.
But for lack of better terms, we all kind of agree on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so here's my last little punch to David.
Hit me, baby.
Under atheism, good has to become relative, and becoming an atheist doesn't suddenly solve the problem of evil, because evil still exists. Though the hope that Christianity provides, that we will one day be redeemed and that all wrongs will be made right eventually, can help people cope with evil in a sense, which, at the very least, provides a more practical way of dealing with life's struggles. Christianity claims that God himself became man in Jesus and that he was unjustly crucified and then rejected by the Father. Remember, my God, why have you forsaken me? And don't forget how many of the early Christians were martyred for their beliefs. See what happened after Jesus rose again. We can likely all agree that it is immoral to kill someone for their beliefs. God is not immune or indifferent to suffering. Even Jesus himself was a victim of human evil. Not only can he relate to us, he cared so much for us that he endured evil for us. Remember, Christianity doesn't just point to moral progress. It ultimately points to the union of heaven and earth and the eventual eradication of evil itself. See Revelation 20 to 22 for more on this. In conclusion, I believe that God, like us, is against evil, not the source of it. And that is all I have. Yeah. And obviously that first part was not specifically against this specific atheist we have on the panel today.
Yeah, I mean...
But...
And real quick...
Yeah,
there's something that I just thought of. I remember reading a article with a pretty famous nu metal lead singer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the issues with the problem of evil come from the viewpoint of the church you're closest to or that you grew up in. Why? And the sort of hatred that can be spewed from some churches.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it, God doesn't hate anyone no matter how they're born, whether gay, straight, white, black, Christian, Islamic, Jewish, Hindi. If you truly believe in an all-loving God, then that problem of hating on a certain subsect of people is erased. Because if you believe that God loves everyone, it loves everyone. There's no in between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's basically like at most he can be a disappointed parent.
Yeah, but he still loves you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you might...
Sometimes there's, tough love involved. Sometimes you gotta, change. Some people don't want to do that, but, know.
But I think a lot of the issues with that comes from the certain churches that someone may be a part of growing up or may have friends that are a part of growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Or the mainstream views of Christianity.
Yeah.
The politicized views of Christianity.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about this in a later episode.
It just came to my mind thinking of it with the problem of evil.
Yeah.
You may know which artist I'm talking about.
I bet it's
they wear a mask.
Oh, that narrows it down. There's only a few of those. Yeah, actually, there's a couple of them. But yeah, I know who you're talking about.
The big one.
Yeah. The big chungus with 9 members.
That should narrow it down. That lives in a cornfield.
I don't know why we are just not saying it when we've already literally mentioned...
Slipknot.
We've literally mentioned 3 other bands.
And that was always something that struck me as
Has he So I assume you're talking about Corey Taylor.
Yeah.
Has he like gone out and been like, "This is why I don't believe in God"?
This was like 2014.
Okay.
And
Because I don't pay attention to what Corey Taylor says, even though Loudwire reports on everything.
Every single thing. It's like, oh, here's his new acoustic. It's like, I don't care.
Here's what Corey Taylor thinks about what Corey Taylor thinks about.
I understand
Corey
why
Taylor
he said
hates
it
new music.
because it was a very emotional response to someone coming at him.
Uh-huh.
But if you truly believe in an all-loving God, then that problem's not there.
Yeah.
Just say you're an atheist and let's agree to disagree.
All right.
Yeah, and I mean,
Or just say you just don't believe because that's something only you can know.
Yeah.
and also like people, as you were saying, like people thinking kind of like God could be evil. It's like, then what's the point of believing in him?
In Christians, real quick.
Go ahead.
In Christians, if you say God loves everybody, show it.
Yep.
Use your actions as your fate.
That's a real struggle.
Yeah, as I was-
It's a struggle, but do your best.
Yeah.
If you fuck up, admit it.
Yep.
If you just don't like this person,
Don't deny rape allegations until you're dead.
yeah.
Somebody we have
Dun,
mentioned.
dun, dun.
No, some people know who we're
Yeah.
referring to.
And I think
There's a few of them.
A lot of issues, like what a lot of issues,
Probably
with
a lot more than
religion
we
in
think.
general, is cultural believers, as I'm going to label them. People who are just in it because it's what the parents did, or this, or just like cultural politics.
Yeah, there's like a certain level of belief that's like just like, you know,
Surface.
a mental assent to a thing, and then there's like the thought out kind of stuff, like you've thought this stuff through, and like you've and this is on both sides of the fence. No matter what your worldview is, there are some people, you know, who just haven't thought shit out, like hardly at all.
Yeah.
And you can tell when you talk to them that they don't really
Care.
think through these things or care, or, you know, and that's a little concerning.
Well, yeah. And again, as we said, probably last episode, maybe the episode before, maybe the episode before that, Christians, your biggest problem are you guys. Work
Yep.
from within and show the people you really give a shit.
As unfortunate as it is, I have to agree with you, because
I mean, that's a
which, by the way, guys,
I feel like
this is an off-mic conversation between me and Michael. I'm the one who told him that, and he's stealing my thunder. But it's okay. I give you permission because I agree with you.
well, it's something that I've thought about, but
You never had
it's
the
also
words.
something we kind
Yes.
of like have discussed, because I mean the worst part of humanity is humanity.
Yeah.
the
in
worst part of
general.
atheists is atheists.
Yeah,
As agnostics, we're just fucking lost.
I mean, same with like
The worst part of Republicans is the Republicans. Worst part of liberals are liberals.
yeah, it's
fucking-
the aggressive
The
outliers.
vocal minority.
It's the people.
Yeah.
People
Whereas-
are people.
Intellectuals that you've showed me, or even you yourself. I know you probably wouldn't label yourself as one of the higher intellect, but talking to you, it's talking to a real person who's done some research, who is more than just words, and so I can respect that. And you want to fix the problem by being part of the solution, and I respect the fuck out of that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
fam.
And I want to check real quick. Are we going to talk about like an evil God idea?
I wanted to. I don't have that as an episode, or at least written down, but I can add it.
Because I mean, I don't think it.
It's an interesting idea,
But it's also like, what's the point of believing if you're going to be in a toxic ass relationship?
it doesn't hold up in some ways.
It has no benefit.
But
like,
It's
he's
like
going to just
worshiping the
smite you.
literal devil.
It sounds like that until you hear like the fully thought out version. Basically, it's everything you can imagine. I'm just gonna go ahead and refute it real quick.
Do it. Because
Bonus on this episode, people.
because I think like it's
If the evil God challenge is essentially imagine everything that you think about in the good God, basically omniscient, all knowing, but instead of all loving, it's all hating, it's all powerful, of course. So the problem with it is under that hypothesis, we only exist for God to torment us and suffer.
Yeah,
and
we're
make us
like
suffer.
we're like the toys he takes apart and rips the arms off and shit.
We
But
exist out of spite.
But if you compare this to the good God doesn't need humanity. The good God is entirely independent of humanity. But the evil God, in order to maximize evil, must have something to be evil too. So that God needs humanity, which limits the evil God.
Yeah, unless he wants to go like fuck with the stars and cause like a black hole or something.
Maybe he's an evil god to us, but he's a good god to the aliens because fuck you.
Okay.
Fucking aliens.
And the other thing
what
is
next, time travel, Michael?
the other objection I would have to it is it would be very easy to imagine a world that is much more evil. Why not just go ahead and put us in hell? Because that would be a greater evil for this evil
I don't know,
God.
at
It's
least
the ultimate evil.
I mean, the devil has some favorites, probably.
Yeah. So,
Evil God would have no favorites.
Basically, it's a very interesting discussion. I've heard a couple podcast YouTube videos on this. It's interesting to listen to. Basically, long story short, it's you make all the equivalents of the good God, but make it evil and the opposite of good.
It's a fun thought experiment to make you think, life could be worse.
But the problem is not all of those things hold up, because the argument is that all of the arguments for God's existence that you can point to can just as equally be applied to an evil God. But the problem is the all good, omniscience, omnipotence, pure evil, like these things they're not, one of the things being, not needing humanity, that doesn't add up. Because like the good God doesn't need humanity, whereas the evil God does need humanity.
He just happens to want you to join him once you reach a higher.
So basically,
sentence.
there's a logical imbalance there, which tips the scale in favor of a good God. And really, the evil God hypothesis is just the challenge is really all we have to do, if you're arguing for the evil God, is make it equally plausible that an evil God exists as a good God. And as I demonstrated with those two issues, it's not equally plausible, so therefore a good God is more likely. So there's your bonus content.
All because I happen to say like...
I'm glad I just remembered that off the top of my head, but...
Because all I said was like, I don't see a point of believing God if he's like an evil dick.
Yeah, well...
Because there's nothing to win.
That's really just the atheist objection is like, well, okay, fine. Maybe I can't refute your arguments for God's existence. I'm just going to make him evil, and therefore... you're worshiping an evil God. And this stems out of the problem of evil.
Well, you believe my God's a 3-year-old playing army war.
It's contingent upon the problem of evil, and it also builds off of an objection to the God of the Old Testament, which we will talk about later.
Give us kind of less free will if we're just going to be shitty people.
Yeah. And then you also wouldn't have free will in that universe because you would be determined to do evil.
It's like the worst part of Calvinism.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, you're just destined to hell.
Yeah.
Cause havoc and chaos.
So anyway, that is the problem of evil. Do we have any other thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I mean...
I think we've probably beaten a dead horse. Problem of evil to us is not a problem.
Like simulation theory.
It's not on that level, I don't think.
To me it is.
Okay. All right.
I just didn't get as raging about it.
Right.
Atheists don't use that bullshit.
Well,
if you believe
they use it a lot.
But then you don't believe in science, so suck my dick.
I mean...
All right.
I'm sorry, everybody. I struck a nerve when I said it's simulation theory.
Yeah. You know, it hits him in the heart when he brings up simulation theory.
An atheist.
He has a fucking flashback.
To Nom. I mean, simulation theory. All right, anyway, that's about it. I think we're done with this episode, so...
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. See you next week when we talk about the problem of divine hiddenness.
Bazinga.
See you guys then.